man, it is moving quick. Let's read them. Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Iowa, Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, West Virginia. Written sanctuary cities for America. Beautiful. Mankind in Arizona. You're on the air. Thanks for holding.
Humanity is rising and is awake, Alex.
When someone starts yelling, the best thing you got to do is you just got to, the perfect improv instinct is just to yell with them.
Yell with them. Like, yeah. You don't know why they're yelling. You just show. I mean, look. Michael Brooks always said Alex Jones is the most talented broadcaster of our generation, and you know, I think that instinct. I mean, how many people would have done that?
I don't think I would have.
When you started yelling, I yelled, but I didn't take myself off of mute. So I think that shows the difference.
Same here.
I started thinking about like, it's like which of our, because our commenter is going to start saying like too loud. You blew out my eardrums. That's all losers mindset. Alex just started yelling.
No, exactly. Look, say what you want. The man is a natural showman. On the content of what he's talking about, and by the way, I'm Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. We usually start that way instead of with screaming. I am joined as always by our super producer, Jake Appett, and our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. And yeah, if you think about the content of what he was talking about just before and after the primal screams, it is kind of a weird reversal. So Alex Jones, for the longest time, like, was somebody who was like a big part of his shtick was that he was concerned about like surveillance, the Patriot Act, stuff like that, right? Like, in fact, I'm old enough to remember a time that Alex Jones was much more left-coded, at least, than he is now. Richard Linklater gave him these little cameos where he's essentially playing himself in Waking Life and Scanner Darkly. And when, in those roles, when he's screaming about, civil liberties and corporations and stuff like that, he sounds crazy, but he sounds like a crazy leftist, basically. And it's a little unclear to me. I'm not going to claim sort of deep expertise in like Alex Jones studies, but it's a little unclear to me how much his beliefs have actually changed and how much it is that just during the Bush era, he sort of put forward and emphasized the aspects of what he thought that were the most kind of amenable to an audience of people who basically didn't like Bush. And then later on, under Obama, and then especially, he kind of put forward more sort of right-friendly aspects of what he thought. And then, when Trump came along, he latched hard onto that, right? But like at least some of it, right, has probably always been the same. I think some of the sort of stuff about the coming war between the angels and the demons and the lizard people who are really demons and all that stuff has probably been, fundamentally similar over his different incarnations. But stuff like this does make me wonder how much, he actually has adjusted, right, over the years, right? Because like the kind of fundamental Alex Jones thing was always, stripping away the lizard people and whatnot, was always about distrust of state power. And here, as is kind of often true for like Trump era and post-Trump era Alex Jones, he's all for state power, right? The sort of fundamental thing that they're talking about, right? This standoff that's been going on at the border in Texas, where the Border Patrol wants access to people who are trying to cross at places other than legal points of entry, so they can process them. So people who have asylum claims, can be heard. So people who are in danger of drowning in the Rio Grande don't. And the Texas National Guard has been trying to prevent that, right? That they've actually put up razor wire to stop, to keep people out at these points. And there has been this sort of what looks like this constitutional crisis, and that's certainly how a lot of people, including Alex, have taken it. Although he's all for it, right? Because it's the rebellion that he wants. About basically whether or not to allow the border patrol access. We could talk about the nuances of that legally, but like at its core, right? He wants the jackbooted government thugs to like put up razor wire and to do a better job of like rounding people up and deporting them and all that stuff. So, there is some interesting friction with kind of the old Alex Jones emphasis, as I think has been kind of clear for some time. I remember there was a Jacobin article from like 2015, 2016, after I think maybe the first time Trump went on Alex Jones's show, which is bizarre to remember that happened, where, I don't remember who wrote it, but I do remember the title because this was back when Jacobin articles could have fun titles because everything hadn't been taken over by search engine optimization. It was called Smokey the Bear, the UN and Hitler. And in that article, whoever wrote this was pointed out, look, this is a guy who's been sounding the alarms forever about government surveillance. And there's a point in the interview where Trump was like, yeah, we need to have more surveillance at mosques. And Alex was like, yeah. Right. So it's, it's confusing. Right. But, you definitely, whatever else you can say, and we're going to get into the actual underlying issue. Whatever. Like the guy, I don't know how much it matters what the proportions are of psychopath and grifter in Alex's soul, but stuff like this does make me wonder.
I think it's interesting, and I'm sure I'm not the first to note, but to think about people with anti-authoritarian politics that aren't really based in, let's say, like a class analysis, or at least a rigorous analysis of some kind, how often that just kind of drifts, right wing, or drifts in a way that isn't very anti-authoritarian at all. You know what I mean? It's just more of like some kind of expression of anger or rage or negation, without much of a positive, which I think, I feel like you really see this a lot with people that you're like, yeah, they just kind of started anti-authoritarian, like Tim Pool, right? Was like part of, like he was like a pro-Occupy guy, right? And then it goes into being like a pro-Trump guy, and there's this drift that I think is interesting, and you see it in people like Jones, and I feel like part of it is just not having a super coherent analysis at its base. And the other thing I was thinking is when you were saying that he's changed, but he's stayed the same on like lizard people and all that stuff. I was thinking, how Bill Maher's whole thing is like, I haven't changed. Like it's you guys that have changed. I want to see Alex Jones saying that about like, I still believe in the lizard people and angels and demons. You know what I mean? It's you guys have changed. But yeah, I don't know.
I actually kind of want to see Alex Jones on Club Random.
Yes, please.
To see Alex Jones on Club Random. Although it might be a little dangerous because there's this component of explicit drinking on set in Club Random, and I guess he would be doing that anyway, but like just letting him do it out in the open without having to like take like a suspicious number of bathroom breaks.
They seem to have very different reactions to alcohol if Alex Jones is really drinking, which is that you might have the sleepiest interviewer combined with the most energetic interviewee possible, which I think would be an amazing energy.
No,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm down. I think it should.
By the way, I don't know if you've seen those memes, but of who should we have as the next season of True Detective? I think Bill Maher and Alex Jones as the two detectives in True Detective season 5 or whatever would be an amazing pairing.
Nice. To be honest, I only ever watched the first season of True Detective.
Same.
Yeah.
but to the policy concerns at hand, though.
Yeah, to the policy concerns. Okay, so I actually I do know a little bit more about this than I would have otherwise. Although I think Andy is probably the person here who's most well informed on this. We're going to go to him in a minute, but on last Friday I was going to go on Newsmax and debate one of the hosts there about a couple of things that have in the news, and one of them was going to be the Texas border standoff. So I kind of spent a lot of my Friday reading up on that, and then the segment ended up getting bumped because of breaking news. I don't know, it's Newsmax. Trump probably tweeted, and they had to spend an hour talking about how awesome and based it was. But in any case, so one thing that I do know here that's like, I think there are more interesting things to say than this, right? But just if anybody's curious about the actual legal aspect of what's going on here. So the thing that kind of seems like a constitutional crisis at a quick glance is that the Supreme Court, well, the way it's been widely reported is like, the Supreme Court ordered Governor Abbott to take down the razor wire, and he put in more razor wire, which just sounds like a level of constitutional crisis that we haven't had in a very long time, right? Like on the face of it. Now, there is an explanation for why it's not. It's really dumb, but I'll tell you what the loophole is that I think Abbott, understands himself to be using. The Supreme Court decision didn't say that they had to take down the razor wire. The Supreme Court ordered them, said that they weren't allowed to obstruct the Border Patrol from coming in to take down the razor wire. So technically speaking, just, you could have like a Border Patrol guy, walking around with a pair of scissors, cutting down razor wire, and a Texas National Guardsman behind him putting up more razor wire, and nobody would actually be violating the Supreme Court's order. I told you this was going to be stupid, but there you go. I think that's the loophole.
Like when you're not allowed to turn on lights on Shabbos.
Exactly.
I think you made this metaphor, this analogy, but
yeah, exactly.
So you have a Christian do it for you.
Yeah. It's like the guy in the black hat and the side locks who could if you have the Shabbos going there, and say, it sure is dark in here, and you haven't technically told him to turn the lights on, so you're not violating, the Shabbos restrictions. Yeah. Okay. So that's the dumb part. As far as the underlying issue, and I guess we'll see what happens legally if the Supreme Court goes back and is like, no, we actually, sorry, we should have been clearer. You got to stop putting it up. But in any case, as far as the underlying issue, there's a big, there has been this giant right-wing freakout in the last several months. Really in the last several years, there's been kind of a rolling freakout, but there's been a particularly intense one in the last few months on the right about the border and immigration and fentanyl, which is, which they definitely wrap up in there in the sort of bundle of things that they're freaking out about. And this is something that I think if you're not following right-wing media, it's kind of easy to mostly miss, right? Because it's something that like mostly other people aren't talking that much about. But if you do, it's like all that they're talking about. Like I I wrote an article for Jacobin. I briefly mentioned it last week, but we didn't really have time to get into it before Luke came on, called "The GOP is Melted Down," about immigration, where the most kind of striking stat that I saw that I cited at the beginning of that is that the word border has appeared more times in political ads since the beginning of the year than any other word, including endorse and message. Right? It's just like border, border, border all day, all night. And you know, I think there are a few different issues here. And, you know, for the sake of like actually saying something real about this and not just kind of making fun of Alex Jones and moving on, you know, it's worth disentangling them. So one is that it really is true that the system for processing asylum seekers is pretty overstrained right now, right? Like this is, you know, there's a big backlog. It takes forever. There's like, there's all kinds of, you know, even though the, you know, actual border enforcement is pretty clearly supposed to be federal, and we could get into the sort of asinine argument that Abbott is using to say that it's not, but, and the courts, right, for processing these people are certainly federal. There also really is an issue about like where the resources are coming from, to the extent that we have them at all, right, to kind of take care of people while they're waiting, you know, to be processed. That you know, this is why, right, that stunt where people like Abbott and DeSantis will ship asylum seekers to, you know, New York City or Chicago or wherever. You know, it's cruel and dumb. And I think if you're willing to like move people around the country to make this point, you know, you're kind of not quite taking them seriously as people. But the reason that that's an effective stunt is that like it works, right? Like the second it happens, there are lots of people in New York being like, oh my God, you know, we don't have the resources for this, you know, this is terrible. And they can turn around and be like, oh, see, this is what the border states have been, you know, have been going through, right? And so that's a real thing. There's also, you know, the fentanyl thing, you know, is a real thing, right? Most of the fentanyl in the U.S. right now is produced in Mexico, and that obviously has had, you know, devastating effects. And the last thing that I point to that is like a real thing, even if the solution is, you know, the solutions of the right ones are incredibly cruel and stupid, is that, you know, look, there are lots of people who disappear into the underground economy after, you know, after crossing over and making asylum claims, right? Like that happens. There's the, you know, there's a stat that like 90% of people who claim asylum do show up for their hearing, right? But it's also, that leaves 10% who don't. That's also the first hearing. There's a question about like, okay, but then like how many people show up once it's been denied? And you know, and I think it is true, right, that it's like for a variety of reasons, under the table employment isn't great. Labor laws are good. Right. So, and I also think, right, if we're going to be completely honest about this, the combination of capitalism and the nation state system does create some pretty ugly trade-offs when it comes to, you know, supply and demand in the labor market and how that plays out with wages and everything else. And, you know, I'm not totally sure what I think the right solution to all of that is. If I could just snap my fingers and, you know, make it be so. You know, obviously I'd like global, you know, fully automated luxury communism, and would certainly have open borders as part of that deal, right? Because you know, why should your freedom of movement depend on, you know, where you've been coming from? But if we're thinking about like the order of operations, right? Like, okay, what do we want to happen given how much else is the same, right? I think there are some genuinely hard questions there from my perspective. All that said, I think that the right-wing freakout about this is the point of the Jackman article, is kind of peak pseudopopulism, because even when it comes to the real things that they're zeroing in on, this doesn't really address them, right? So so just a couple of quick examples of that. The fentanyl thing, yep. Seems to be the case, right? That right now, vast majority of fentanyl in the U.S. is coming from Mexico, but all of these Republicans, including Trump, Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, who want to send the U.S. military to Mexico to shoot and bomb and defeat the drug cartels militarily, which is what they've been talking about, right, for months. Above and beyond being fucking insane on its merits, right? You really want to start a war with Mexico, and I know they'd say, "Oh, we don't want to start a war with Mexico. We just want to go in and fight the cartels." But it's I don't know what the Mexican army is doing in this scenario while the U.S. army is bombing and shooting people on Mexican territory. And also, even if we pretend that this was going to be completely effective in its stated purpose, I think the idea that drying up this particular source, it's I don't know, a few years ago, Mexico wasn't the main source of fentanyl, right? Presumably if Mexico-based cartels were completely taken out of the game, somebody else would step up to grab up that market share, right? That's how that works. And it's the idea that the problem is the supply really seems to me it fundamentally misses the point, right? The problem is the demand, that, you have deindustrialization, atomization, social hopelessness, right? That leads people into this in the first place, right? What, if the demand exists, I think the supply is gonna follow. So, and similarly, when you talk about, undocumented workers, dragging down wages, I'm not going to deny that there, in some industries, there's truth to that. But I also find it a bit ridiculous that the people who talk the most about this never want to seem to do anything that would more directly prop up wage levels, say raising the minimum wage, or making it easier to form unions. And so it's the one and only thing they're willing to do, supposedly for the sake of wages, is to round up and deport, desperate people who, are mostly nonviolent and just kind of trying to live their own lives and provide for their families, right? That seems pretty grotesque to me. I guess my last thing about this before I go to Andy is just one more thing on the legal point, that the really ridiculous part of the Abbott legal argument is that, it's okay to use the state National Guard for this. We're not usurping federal authority, because there's a line in the Constitution about using militias or whatever to repel invasions. And, it's look, right-wingers always claim to be originalists or textualists about the Constitution. We know what the original meaning of invasion is, and it's not unarmed people crossing the border without authorization to look for jobs, right? That's not what the word invasion means when it appears in the Constitution. In fact, we even have James Madison on record on this, because it came up during the debate about the Alien and Sedition Act. He's yeah, that's not what invasion means. And in fact, I'd also point out that for the first several decades of the United States, we essentially had open borders anyway. So, I think the legal argument is completely ridiculous. And, I think you could argue about the extent to which there are real problems being talked about here, and then what would kind of count as, legitimate or better solutions. But this is just kind of vintage Trump era Republican stuff, which is to say that it's loud and flashy, and there are bits and pieces of truth being weaponized to support it, but it's just kind of incredibly barbaric when the rubber meets the road.
Absolutely. One of the big things is that first of all, why there's immigration in the first place is a lot of it has to do with our foreign policy in Mexico, South America, Central America, and all that stuff. And until, if you really want to address that, we need to start addressing what, those issues. I know Kamala just spent, millions of dollars to find the answers to it. It's like, come on, we know what we know the answers are. We know what the problems are, and what you're doing isn't helping. But she that was like her big thing, and it was a terrible idea. Because it didn't help at all, and it made things worse. Because what it did do is it empowered the cartels. So because that's now who you need to hire. Like before, you didn't have to hire a coyote to get you across the border, but now you kind of have to. And unfortunately, like anytime they do that, like trying to strengthen the border or whatnot, they're basically in a roundabout way empowering the cartels, which is not a good thing. So like, all their plans right now are not going along with what they're doing is not going to do what they think it's going to do. And it's been like that for years. I mean, the probably the best argument to go into Mexico and invade was during the Civil War when the Border Patrol was initially founded. The part of the reason why is there were like a Pancho Villa would actually cross into Texas and invade. And that was part of, not the entirety. I mean, there's a lot of reasons about the Border Patrol, but that was one of the reasons. Nobody has written a book about the founder, but Mehente, which is a book I've not read, does outline and it's been like cited in all these other books I've read. But it does do a great job, going over the history of it, how like a lot of the original members of the KKK, and the fact that like even Frank W. Berkshire, the founder of Border Patrol, who was a horrible, horrible human being, he actually had a lot more compassion for immigrants than what we see today, which is astounding. Like he was the guy who was in charge of the boat that deported Emma Gold's what's her name?
Emma Goldman.
Yes, Emma Goldman. He was part of that Soviet ark that he was actually in charge of the boat for that. Like not a good person, and yet he has more compassion. Like I found articles where he's talking about like we have the most advanced washing machines and we have new clothes for immigrants and we're giving them medicine as they cross the border. And it's like that was 1920 people. That was 100 years ago, and they're this guy who's surrounded by members of the Ku Klux Klan is doing a better job than we are now.
Yeah, so this is something when you and I were talking about this the other day that you were emphasizing, because I kind of made the point about how something that seems like just on a common sense level, it's got to be part of any sort of real solution to this is like having some like much more real federal level, resources for, giving people a place to stay and, things like that, while you process their asylum claims. And something you told me in that conversation was that this is something that we actually used to have much more of.
Yeah. And it's astounding. I know in the graphics, I put up the article that it's not really worth reading, but it's for the sakes of this conversation, but it is absolutely worth checking out. If you want to do a little research on this, like I said, I found this, all immigrants will be washed. It's talking about like how great of a situation they have. These buildings and that they have and clothings and, like top of the line 1920s technology, they're able to do this, so why in 100 years in the future, we're having a similar problem because granted, it's not the Mexican Civil War that's causing this migration. It's reactions to our own, our own excesses across, the continent.
Right. That makes sense to me. The super chat from Strom: could decline in immigration cause a crisis in profitability in the imperial metropoles, hasten the collapse of capitalism? Yeah, look, I think lots of things could cause crisis in profitability, but the collapse of capitalism part, I think historically has been proven to be a lot harder.
Yeah, and we've been seeing a decline in immigration, and we're not seeing a collapse of capitalism. So
yeah, I mean, the real problem is that crises can happen for lots of reasons, but the result of the crisis being like, socialism is something that I think would happen under much more specific circumstances where you have, an organized working class. There's, mass socialist, political parties, etc. We don't really have any of that yet. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.